It's time for Hipster History. This is the story of someone called Anthony Johnson. Not Anthony and the Johnsons, Anthony Johnson. He was born around 1600. Anthony Johnson was captured, and this is from the Wikipedia. You're not going to believe this, because I couldn't believe it. Well, that's what you get for looking at Wikipedia, said the midwit. He was captured in his native Angola, that's in Africa, by an enemy nation and sold to Arab slave traders. They sold his services as an indentured servant to a merchant working for the Virginia Company, and he sailed to Virginia in 1621 aboard the ship called the James. He was sold as an indentured servant to a white planter named Bennett to work on Bennett's Virginia tobacco farm. Now, these workers typically worked under a limited indenture contract for 4 to 7 years to pay off their passage, their room, their boarding, their lodging, and their freedom dues. You have to pay off some indentured servitude to become free. And in the early colonial years, most Africans in the 13 colonies were held under contracts of limited indentured servitude. With the exception of those indentured for life, they were released after a contracted period, with many of the indentured receiving land and equipment after their contracts expired or were bought out. And most, Jim Goad talks about this a lot in the Bread Manifesto, white laborers in this period also came to the colony as indentured servants. Now, Anthony Johnson was granted a large plot of farmland by the colonial government after he paid off his indentured contract by his labor. And on July 24th, 1651, he acquired 250 acres of land under the headright system by buying the contracts of 5 indentured servants, 5 other indentured servants he was formerly. What's that headright system? This is something I learned about also. It was used in several colonies, including Maryland, Georgia, North and South Carolina. Headrights were for 1 to 1,000 acres of land and were given to anyone willing to cross the Atlantic to help populate the colonies. You're going to cross the ocean? We're going to give you free land. They were granted to anyone who would pay for the transportation costs of a laborer or enslaved people. So think about it. You bring over 10 slaves, you get 10,000 acres. So it was a very kind of sinister motivation. These land grants consisted of 50 acres for someone moving to the area and 100 acres for people previously living in the area. And by giving the land to the landowning masters, the indentured servants had little or no chance to procure their own land, which kept many colonials poor and led to anger between the poor enslaved people and the wealthy landowners. Okay, so he bought 5 of these headrights. This is where it gets crazy. This is why I'm telling you guys this story. In 1653, John Casor, who was a black indentured servant, whose contract Johnson appeared to have bought in the early 1640s, approached someone named Captain Goldsmith and claimed that his indenture had expired 7 years earlier and that Anthony Johnson was holding him illegally. I served my time. I should be a free man. He's keeping me illegally. A neighbor intervened and persuaded Johnson to free Casor. The neighbor, Robert Parker. Robert Parker offered Casor work, signed a term of indenture to the planter. This was kind of a feudal system in many ways. Anthony Johnson, sued his neighbor in court in 1654 for the return of Casor. The court initially found in favor of Parker, the neighbor. Johnson appealed. In 1655, the court reversed its ruling and found that Anthony Johnson still owned John Casor, and the court ordered that he be returned with the court dues paid by Robert Parker, the neighbor. Let me make it clear. This was the first case of a judicial determination in the 13 colonies. This was the first case holding that someone who had committed no crime could be held in servitude for life. Now, there had been both black and white indentured servants sentenced to lifetime servitude before him. Kesor was the first person declared a slave in a civil case. To make it plain, the first case where someone was ordered to be a slave was the result of a lawsuit filed by a free black man against his white neighbor. And that is hipster history.